again, hope you're keeping well. This week I thought we would take a look at the sculpting tools that I use. I've been cleaning up a bunch of my old prop making tools recently because I'm about to start working in Chavant clay to make some large scale sculptures, and so while I've had everything out and giving it a good strip down and a good clean, I thought that might be a good opportunity to take a walk through some of the tools. So if we pop over onto the floor, we'll take a look. Okay, we've come down onto the floor here because I've got quite a lot of tools, and I'm going to need to spread them out quite wide. But I'll start off by looking at the things that I use most often. So first of all, my surface that I tend to work on. I like to give myself a nice clear surface. So to make sure I do that, I have laid out a work area in the middle of which is this tile, which is the tile that I work on, and this is a nice surface for rolling putty onto because it's non-stick. This is just a glazed ceramic tile. It's white, so you can see what you're working on nice and easily. If I want to make a little shape, like say I'm doing a base or a shield or something, I can smooth that out level onto here and then trim the shape out, and it's not going to scratch up. It's a very nice surface to work on. So that's my general work surface. I'll quite often have lying around some bits of aluminium sheet as well. These ones I've just drawn out. I'm going to make some wings for a dragon on here. So I've just bent this to the shape that I want the wings to have, and then drawn the outline of the wings on here, and I'm just going to roll some milliput onto here and then use this as a work surface. And then when that's cured, it will be cured in this kind of curved shape, and I can peel it off. This still has the protective film on this side, so I can peel that off. It'll come off nice and cleanly, flex the aluminium to get it off without breaking the putty, and then I can work on the back surface. So that's a handy thing to have around. The tools that I most often use, this is a dowel. I don't know if you can see that. There you go. This is a dowel with a pin in the end of it. This is very fine. Actually, it's not a pin, it's a needle. This is a very fine needle. I don't know if you can, probably can't see that on the video, but this is the finest needle that you can find. It's just regular sewing needle that you can buy. And I've just drilled a hole in the end of this length of dowel with a pin vise, put some epoxy glue on the shaft of the pin and push that in using a pair of pliers, and that's nice and firm in there. I do have one of these tools that was actually given to me by Kev White when I did his sculpting class, which is basically the same, but it's put into a pencil, this nice sort of triangular pencil, which is nice and easy to hold. But you might be able to see there that this pin, it protrudes quite a long way out here, and that means that if you put any kind of pressure on there, it bends. And so over time, that's got a little bit wobbly. It's held in with a bit of green stuff here, which gives it this nice kind of tapered pencil-like feel to it. But it gets bent and it's not easy to work with. So I prefer to work with one which has a much shorter amount of needle showing there. We also need to replace these quite quick, not that often, but every couple of years, because the needle will get blunted and dulled over time. You do want a nice sharp point on that. So here's another one that I did that has a longer needle, and that has also bent. You can see this is very, very flexible here, so don't use that very often, just use the one that's nice and close. Sometimes you'll want to get in really close, so I've got this one. This has, again, it's just it is a pin in this case, not a needle, because I needed to bend them. So this is bent pins in both sides here, one bent at right angles and one at 30 degrees, just for those times when you need to get into narrow spaces and you have to hold the tool at a particular angle to get in there because you haven't got room to get a straight tool in there. So that's why I use that one, but don't use that very often. And this is just a chunkier version of the same thing. This is essentially a metal cocktail stick shoved into the end, but this is a sort of actual bought tool rather than a homemade job. So for larger things we use that. But By far, that's my most commonly used tool, pin shoved into the end of a length of dowel, coupled with a silicon clay shaper. Now here is quite an array of silicon clay shapers. I don't generally use this many. Typically I use a chisel tipped black fern. These came from Jackson's Art Supplies. This is a silicon clay shaper. This is a chisel tip black extra firm tip. And I'll use a round one for smoothing off the surface afterwards. And I'll sometimes use one of these angled chisel tips for doing creases in fabric. Particularly, they're quite good for scoring lines and smooth creases. But you can get these in quite a lot of. That's another one of those chunky pin things. You can get these in quite a lot of different types. So you can get much larger ones. These grey tipped ones, the colour typically denotes the hardness. So these are medium, although they're quite flexible. And I really only use these for smoothing the surface, not much for sculpting and shaping. And then these white ended ones are the very lightweight ones. And I just bought these really to see what they were like, but they're not designed for sculpting epoxy putty. That's not what they were created for, and these are really a bit too light for that purpose, so I don't use these particularly often. These other ones that I've got here, I just wanted to pick out a couple of things. These two are two old chisel tipped shapers. This one I keep. You might be able to see there the end of this is a bit crusty and white. Sometimes I use a bit of super glue in sculpting, and whenever you use super glue and epoxy putty together, it really bites into the end of this silicone and it won't let go. So if I'm doing a sort of armature that involves application of super glue and putty at the same time, I'll use this one and not a nice new clean one, because I know that if this one gets a bit grottier, it doesn't matter. It's already a bit grotty at the end. And this one is just one that I've used for the last couple of years, and you won't be able to see that on the camera, but it's worn very, very thin. I hadn't realised quite how thin it had got until I picked up this new one. And I was thinking, oh, my sculpting edges is getting a little bit soft. What's going on here? And it's because the clay shaper has just worn down loads. So I'm going to keep this because I think this will in itself be a useful tool, but it's no longer my regular clay shaper. I've got a new one there, and same with those two. Okay, scalpels are very important for cutting, for marking edges, and for pressing in fine details. Eyes, lips do with scalpels. I've got two types here. I've got a retractable scalpel and a regular scalpel. At the university that I work at, when I teach the model making students, we say that always use a retractable scalpel, because if you're going to put it down on the table, you don't want to grab it by the wrong end or somebody else grab it by the wrong end and cut yourself with it. So much better to have a retractable scalpel, but I had some of these non-retractable scalpels anyway, and I like to have a couple on the go because you can see these have got different ends to them. This is a regular straight. If I was going to be really good at this, I would tell you what the name was, but you can get these blades in lots of different types and different sizes, and this is just a regular straight cutting blade. But this one has got quite a fine curved tip to it, and it gives you this is nice for getting you a point, but if you want to cut fine details like mouths and things, I find that the curve on the end of this blade is much nicer. So rather than swapping in and out, I just have a couple on the go at a time. And the other thing that I use really frequently are these tools. Again, these are my own creations, but essentially this is a dowel just shaped so that it will take the ends here, which are the ends of mechanical pencils. So I've got a 0.7mm, a 0.5mm and a 0.3mm end, and a slightly larger pen end, and these are just for pressing circles in, so either for making patterns or for doing rivets. You put a little blob of putty on, press firmly with a moistened end of one of these mechanical pencils, and then with a pin you can pick off the outside and you're left with a nice round rivet. And if I want to do those in different sizes, that's why I've got different sizes of these. This is also just the insert of a mechanical pencil, which has got that end remaining on it. That's the bit that would grip the lead on the inside, but that also is quite a good other size ring. And the other things on here, this is, I don't know where this bit is actually from. This is quite a small circle, and this is a bit from a soldering iron, a gas soldering iron. But again, that comes in handy sometimes. So find odd things, random things that have circles in different sizes, which are always helpful, and put them on bits of dowel. Very useful to have. These you can get from cosmetic suppliers, or from hobby suppliers, but they're generally cheaper if you get them from cosmetic suppliers. They're sold for applying nail beads, if that's a thing that you like, I don't know. But you can get these in different sizes, and they're essentially just ball-ended lengths of metal on a nice handle. They come in different sizes. They're useful for doing chainmail and things. Pair of tweezers is always handy, just for manipulating things. And files, needle files, because once the putty's off, sometimes you want to shape it, especially if you're working in Milliput or Procreate, or one of the putties that are better for sanding and filing. Green stuff isn't that good at it, so if I'm doing something like weapons or bases where I want to shape it afterwards, I will use a Milliput, or at least a Milliput mix, to be able to do that. So it's not difficult to acquire needle files in lots of different shapes and sizes. Typically, I would say that you want a 3 square file. So this is a file with 3, like a triangular with 3 edges on it. You can do square things with that, and it's also good for doing corners. And a round file. And I tend to use a semicircular as well. You can see that some of these are greener, they're a bit gummed up. Get yourself a nice fine wire brush and brush off afterwards. The dust does come off quite nicely afterwards. I've just been a bit slack doing it with these, but you don't want to be working with files that are really gummed up. You want to try and get that excess putty off as quickly as you can. With all of these tools, try and keep it as clean as possible. You don't want to be working with dirty tools. I've also just got a couple of nail files here, really useful for just buffing up surfaces. Once you've filed them, that can leave some streaky marks. And I'm guilty of leaving those from time to time, but if you want them nice and smooth, buff them up with nail files, or get a bit of 600 or 1200 grit sandpaper on a fine block and buff those back. So that's the tools that I use most often, and if I'm really honest, I use a pin. I use a couple of the clay shapers. I'll occasionally use one of these tools. I'll use a scalpel, and I'll use the files when I need to. So that's my kit. And if I'm going to sculpt somewhere away from home, that's what I take with me. I don't generally take all of the rest of the stuff. I just generally sort of take this in its own little box. Other things, pliers. You'll want to be moving your armature around, so I've got a pair of snips, a pair of round nose pliers, and a pair of square nose pliers. Pin vise, again, if you're working with armature wire, you might need to make holes in bits of the body that you've already done to insert more wire in, or move things around, so it's helpful to have a pin vise. Wax shaping tools. Now these were a gift from Roddy. Roddy, if you're watching, thank you. Roddy was my housemate when I moved back to Bristol after I'd moved away since university and gone to work in Germany for a bit. I came back to Bristol, and Roddy was my housemate for a while, and convinced me to move from doing big prop things into sculpting little war games miniatures as well. So indebted to you, Roddy, and thank you for giving me these tools. I don't use these that often most of the time, but they're tools that every now and again you'll find something is useful, and there are points on here, and there are particular sort of angled tools and round tools and bits that are just absolutely perfect for that one particular job. So that's handy. Talking about tools that have a bit of a sentimental value, sentimental side to them, I've got a few things here that are oddments. So these are surgical tools. These are bits of a brain surgeon's kit. My mother-in-law was a theatre nurse for a brain surgery unit for quite a while, so she gave me a bunch of these old, I don't know if they've been used, maybe they've been used, maybe they've been sterilised. They were being got rid of anyway, but these old brain surgery tools, and some of these are really good. This one had a wire, it was like a little wire grabber coming out the end here, so I've taken the grabber out, and that's another sort of circular hole that I use quite often for shaping rivets, and just some really nasty spike things. It's just fun to be sculpting with brain surgery tools. And then these tools, so there's a couple here. These are I think they're hardwood dowel, or they might have been pencil handles or paintbrush handles. Actually, I think it's more likely paintbrush handles, given the finish on here at one point. Turned down with sandpaper or with a pencil sharpener, and oiled and made really firm. These are, you can roll with them and you can score with them, and they're really nice to feel. They're just really smooth, really well used, really worn tools. This one is a large bodkin needle with a lump of putty on the end that's then been rolled onto a stone, so it's got this rough surface. And same with this. This is like a combination of those two. So it's a section of paintbrush handle turned down to, so you've got a spike on one side and this knobbly texturing blob on them for mapping textures over a surface. And these were given to me by a chap called Bernard Pearson, who runs the Discworld Emporium, used to be known as the Cunning Artificer. And he used to run Clarecraft that made the Discworld sculptures back in the 90s, and these were the tools that he used for sculpting those and other things. Like, you might be familiar with the Lilliput Lane, the little houses. My grandmother collected quite a lot of those, and he sculpted a lot of those. So these were his tools, and he gave those to me. So they have a value to me because of that. This is a tool that is very much the same. It's just a point, a nice smooth point there, and some nice clean edges here that you can use. But this was a peg. I made a few years ago a sitar for my wife, who wanted to learn to play the sitar, but we couldn't get a hold of one, so I made one, trying to work out from various things online how to put one together. And this was one of the tuning pegs for the sympathetic strings. From that I had a leftover one, so that's a nice sort of sentimental addition to my kit. Got a comb here. Sometimes you want to create stripes, or particularly if you're doing cables for futuristic things, if you roll them onto the surface of a fine-tooth comb like this knit comb, that's quite good for making pipes and tubey bits. Here's my selection of palette knives. I generally use these for mould making rather than sculpting, for smoothing silicone onto surfaces. So they're not really sculpting tools, but I have them with my sculpting kit, so I thought I would get them out and show you anyway. I've got some large silicone clay shapers here. I don't use these for wargaming stuff very often because they're too big, but for working with wax and oil based clays and and just regular modelling clay. These are quite useful on a larger scale. These wire ribbon tools, again, I generally use these for bigger scale sculpting, for carving out bits of clay. I probably wouldn't use them with a modelling putty because the putty's a bit too sticky. It will probably gum up the ends here. But these big sculpts that I'm moving on to, I'm going to be using Chabant, which is a plastiline and oil-based clay. So I'll be able to work with these. And then these are my regular hardwood clay tools, so you can pick these up in any art supplier in a pack. And the advantage with these tools is that if you don't find one that does quite what you want, they're quite cheap. So you can cut them around, and so like this one, this was a straight pointed end here, but because I wanted a right angle that I could use to score a right angle in some clay, I just trimmed that corner there to a right angle, sanded it all down, made it all nice and smooth, and then that is a useful tool. And again, these flat ends you can carve shapes into to curve things, but I wouldn't again necessarily use these for modelling putty, more for wax and oil-based clays. So I hope that's interesting. I hope it's possibly helpful to you, but interesting certainly. If you've got any favourite tools that you like to use, do let me know. I think the best tools are ones that you can come up with yourselves. Often when you're doing a process, you'll find that you need something that you don't have access to. So you make something, you cobble something together, and those are quite often the most interesting and sometimes the most useful tools. So it'd be good to see if you've got any that you've come up with. I'm planning to do a few more sort of sculpting tutorial videos. I did two in fact last year, one on armatures and one on faces. So if you've taken a look at those, let me know if they were helpful. As I say, I am not a genius sculptor. There are far better sculptors out there, and there are some far better sculptors out there doing videos. But I think it's useful sometimes to see how different people approach things, get some different ideas for how you can work things, and pick a mix from here and there and find what works for you, because everyone will have a different style and a different kind of way of approaching a subject. So yeah, I think it's helpful to have some videos out there. So I'm hoping to do that quite soon. If there's anything in particular that you think would be useful for me to cover, again, give me a shout, let me know, and I will see you next week. Take care.